Welcome to Podkey Daily News, where today's brief runs from Hormuz to NATO to inflation. The biggest practical shift today is that the U.S. Iran ceasefire is effectively gone, and markets are already reacting like energy supply is back on the front line. At the same time, NATO showed public unity while exposing real strain underneath. And that matters for Ukraine, defense budgets, and how much risk allies think Washington is willing to take. President Trump said publicly at the NATO summit that the ceasefire with Iran is over, framing it as both leverage and a harder turn in posture. U.S. forces then struck roughly 80 Iranian targets, including more than 60 high-speed boats, in retaliation for tanker attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian outlets confirmed explosions, and Iranian negotiators accused Washington of violating the memorandum that had governed the pause. The practical risk here is maritime escalation in one of the world's most important oil choke points. Iran is warning that after a 60-day exemption period, it may start charging fees for passage through the strait, and markets are also talking about the possibility of a U.S. naval blockade. Crude jumped about 5% on the reports, which tells you traders are pricing in supply friction even before any formal shutdown happens. What to watch next is whether this remains a tit-for-tat at sea or turns into a sustained shipping disruption that pushes insurance, freight, and fuel costs higher. At NATO, leaders staged solidarity, but the summit also showed how conditional that unity still is. Trump attacked European allies in public, threatened trade pressure on Spain, revived talk of taking Greenland, and suggested troop withdrawals, all while asking partners to carry more of the burden. European members responded with bigger spending commitments, framed as up to 5% of GDP over the next 5 to 10 years, plus more than $50 billion for long-range precision weapons. That is a real shift in burden sharing. But it is also a sign that allies are trying to buy stability in the relationship with Washington. The thing to watch is whether those pledges turn into actual procurement and force posture changes or stay mostly political cover. The most concrete Ukraine development from the summit was Trump pledging Patriot interceptors and approving a license for Ukraine to produce its own Patriot air defense missiles. Longer term, that could reduce Kyiv's dependence on U.S. stockpiles, but officials also acknowledged it does not solve Ukraine's immediate shortage problem. Trump also endorsed deeper Ukrainian strikes into Russian territory as a defensive offense, which signals more tolerance for aggressive Ukrainian operations. That matters because NATO and U.S. long-range munition stockpiles are already strained, so policy is shifting even as inventories stay tight. Watch for whether production licensing moves faster than usual and whether allies loosen additional restrictions on where Ukraine can strike. If the Hormuz situation keeps tightening, the economic transmission is straightforward: higher oil, higher shipping costs, and renewed inflation pressure. The IMF has sent mixed but useful signals across separate reports. After the June ceasefire, it lifted its 2024 global growth view to about 3% on resilience, but it also raised headline global inflation for 2023 to 4.7% and warned strategic oil reserves are at multi-year lows. Central banks are watching the same thing. Fed officials have signaled they would raise rates if inflation stays elevated, and the IMF says both the Fed and the ECB may still need more tightening. In markets, energy producers are the near-term winners. Forecasts called for sharply higher quarterly profits for ExxonMobil and Chevron. Politically, governments are trying visible interventions. The White House pushed major grocers to lower beef prices with a $500 million pledge to meat packers, and Trump promised DOJ action against energy firms while setting a target of $2.25 a gallon gasoline. Short-term fixes like Jones Act waivers can ease fuel distribution bottlenecks inside the U.S., but they do not do much if crude itself stays high. What matters next is whether oil holds these gains long enough to change central bank expectations and consumer sentiment heading into the midterms. In tech, the spending is still huge, but investor patience is getting tighter. Apple announced a $30 billion five-year commitment with Broadcom to produce chips in the United States, part of a broader $600 billion domestic investment push. The deal expands Broadcom's Colorado facility and also helps Apple secure exemptions from past tariffs on Chinese components while building more onshore capacity. At the same time, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta lifted combined AI-related spending about 74% year over year to roughly $168 billion in the second quarter. That tells you the AI arms race is still fully on, but markets are no longer rewarding spending by default. Even upbeat chip news has not reliably lifted stocks, and investors increasingly want proof that all this capital turns into durable revenue and margins. So the near-term read is simple. CapEx is surging, domestic chip policy is still getting support, and the next pressure point is whether earnings justify the bill. In U.S. politics, the sharpest candidate-level disruption is in Maine's Senate race. Democratic hopeful Graham Plattner is facing multiple sexual assault allegations, with 6 women interviewed and one accuser, Jenny Rasico, going public. He denies the allegations, but his campaign has stepped back under heavy scrutiny. National Democratic groups and major donors have pulled funding, and party leaders set a July 13 withdrawal deadline, with July 27 as the certification deadline for a replacement. That leaves Democrats rushing through succession planning in a race that matters because they need a narrow set of key seats to hold or win a Senate majority. Names being floated include Troy Jackson, Shanna Bellows, and Nirav Shah, but the larger issue is that the party is now arguing again over insurgent authenticity versus establishment vetting. Watch whether Democrats unify quickly around a replacement or lose time and money in an internal process fight. 2 international stories deserve attention because the numbers and legal stakes are both high. In Bangladesh, nearly 750 children have died in a measles outbreak, with daily new cases near 1,000. An emergency vaccination campaign is now underway, but officials and UNICEF say delayed vaccine orders under the interim government made the crisis worse, and hospitals are overwhelmed. In Sudan, conditions are deteriorating on 2 fronts. Drone attacks on El Obeid have deepened shortages of water, fuel, and medical services in a city that is already a key corridor for displaced people. Separately, the International Criminal Court says it has concrete evidence linking Rapid Support Forces leaders to crimes against humanity in Darfur towns, including Janaina and Al-Fashir, backed by witness testimony, videos, photographs, and forensic material. What to watch here is whether humanitarian access improves at all in Sudan, and whether the ICC case starts producing actual arrests or stronger diplomatic pressure. A couple of business indicators round out the picture. JP Morgan is building a dedicated advisory team for companies valued between $100 million and $500 million, expecting more than 75 bankers focused on lower mid-market deals as baby boomer owners retire and private equity firms rotate portfolios. That is a bet that succession and forced selling will create a steady transaction pipeline, even if the giant deal market stays uneven. And in travel, Delta's new basic business fare shows where airline pricing is heading. Keep the lie-flat seat and premium meal, strip out lounge access and priority handling, and charge separately for the rest. United and others are moving the same way, which means premium cabins are getting more segmented and more transactional for business travelers. That's the brief for now. Shipping risk in Hormuz, pressure-tested unity at NATO, and inflation still one oil spike away from getting harder. You're listening to Podkey Daily News. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.